The bullet whizzed past Natalie Norton's ear close enough that she felt the heat of it scorch the air. And in that moment, she knew with crystal clarity that she was going to die in this God-forsaken canyon if her mare didn't run faster. The horse beneath her was already lathered with sweat, foam flecking from her mouth as her hooves thundered against the hard, packed earth of the canyon floor. Behind Natalie, the sound of pursuit grew louder, the whoops and hollers of the bandits echoing off the red rock walls that rose on either side like the bars of a prison. She had been foolish to take the shortcut through Picket Wire Canyon alone, but the stagecoach had broken an axle 15 miles back, and she couldn't afford to wait 3 days for the repairs. Her father was dying in Los Animas, Colorado, and every hour counted. It was September 1878, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon floor as Natalie urged her horse forward with desperate words and the pressure of her knees. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and streamed behind her like a banner, and her blue traveling dress was covered in dust. She was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Denver who had built a respectable life for herself over the past 4 years, and none of that would matter if the 5 men behind her caught up. She had seen their faces when they had first spotted her on the trail, seen the way their eyes had lit up with something worse than greed. Another shot rang out, and this time her horse screamed and stumbled. Natalie's heart lurched as the animal recovered its footing, but she could feel the change in its gait. The mare was tiring, and soon she would have nothing left to give. Natalie risked a glance over her shoulder and saw the bandits gaining ground, their larger horses eating up the distance between them. The leader, a scarred man with a beard like tangled wire, grinned at her with blackened teeth. She turned back to face forward, and her breath caught in her throat. There, perhaps 100 yards ahead, the canyon narrowed to a passage barely wide enough for 2 horses to ride abreast. And blocking that passage, sitting astride a big buckskin gelding, was a lone cowboy. For a heartbeat, Natalie thought he might be another bandit, another obstacle between her and survival. But then she saw the way he sat his horse, calm and ready, one hand resting on his thigh near the pistol holstered at his hip. The cowboy wore a dark hat pulled low over his eyes, a dusty brown coat, and a red bandana around his neck. Even from a distance she could see he was young, probably not much older than she was, with broad shoulders and the easy posture of a man who had spent his entire life on horseback. As she raced toward him, he raised one hand in a gesture that was unmistakably clear. "Get behind me." Natalie didn't hesitate. She drove her exhausted horse past the cowboy and then wheeled around, her mare trembling and heaving beneath her. The bandits were perhaps 50 yards away now, and they had seen the cowboy blocking their path. They didn't slow down. The scarred leader raised his rifle and fired, and Natalie saw the cowboy's hat fly off his head, revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. The cowboy didn't flinch. Instead, he drew his pistol in one smooth motion and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The reports echoed like thunder in the confines of the canyon, and Natalie watched in shock as 2 of the bandits tumbled from their saddles. The others hauled on their reins, their horses rearing and plunging as they tried to control them. The scarred leader was shouting something, but his words were lost in the chaos. "You boys made a mistake today," the cowboy called out, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. It was a good voice, Natalie thought dazedly, deep and steady without a trace of fear. "This woman is under my protection now. You can turn around and ride out, or you can end up like your friends there. Your choice." The scarred leader spat on the ground. "That's 5 against 1, cowboy." "I don't like them odds for you." 3 against 1, the cowboy corrected. And I'm thinking you don't count so well, seeing as how you just watched me put 2 of yours on the ground in under 3 seconds. But if you want to try your luck, come ahead. I got plenty more bullets." Natalie could see the calculation happening on the leader's face, the way he was weighing his options. She held her breath, her hands tangled in her mare's mane. The 2 remaining bandits with the scarred leader looked uncertain, their horses dancing nervously beneath them. One of them, a younger man with a pockmarked face, said something urgent to the leader. The scarred man's face twisted with rage, but after a long moment he yanked his horse's head around. "This ain't over," he snarled. "We'll remember you, Cowboy." "I'm counting on you forgetting me real quick," the cowboy replied. "Now get." The 3 bandits wheeled their horses and galloped back the way they had come, leaving their 2 fallen companions behind. Natalie watched them go, hardly daring to believe she was still alive. Her whole body was shaking now that the immediate danger had passed, and she realized she was crying without having noticed when the tears had started. The cowboy holstered his pistol and dismounted in one fluid motion. He retrieved his hat from where it had fallen, examined the bullet hole through the crown with a rueful expression, and then walked over to where Natalie sat on her trembling horse. Up close, she could see he was indeed young, maybe 25 at most, with a strong jaw, a straight nose, and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a day's worth of stubble on his face, and a long scar ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone. "You hurt, madam?" he asked, looking up at her with concern. Natalie tried to answer, but all that came out was a sob. She pressed her hand to her mouth, humiliated by her own weakness. The cowboy's expression softened, and he reached up to steady her with a hand on her knee. "Easy now," he said gently. "You're safe." "It's over. I thought they were going to kill me," Natalie managed to say through her tears. "Or worse." "Yes, madam, I expect they had bad intentions," the cowboy agreed. "But they didn't count on running into me. Name's Preston Matthews. I got a camp about a mile from here, and I think your horse could use some rest. Mine too, for that matter. Why don't you come along and catch your breath? I got coffee and beans if you're hungry." Natalie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Preston Matthews swung back into his saddle and started riding at a walk, letting his horse set an easy pace. Natalie's mare followed without prompting, too tired to do anything else. They rode in silence through the canyon, and Natalie used the time to pull herself together. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve and tried to smooth her hair back into some semblance of order, though it was a lost cause without her pins. The bodies of the 2 bandits lay where they had fallen. Preston dismounted and checked them both, then straightened and shook his head. "Dead," he said simply. "I'll come back tomorrow and bury them proper. No matter what they were, they deserve that much." "You killed them to save me," Natalie said, her voice steadier now. "I owe you my life, Mr. Matthews. Call me Preston, madam, and you don't owe me nothing. I saw a woman in trouble, and I did what any decent man would do." He swung back into his saddle, and they continued on. Preston's camp was tucked into a small side canyon, sheltered from the wind and near a trickle of water that ran down from the rocks above. He had a simple setup: a bedroll, a saddle, saddlebags, and a small fire with a blackened coffee pot sitting on a rock at the edge. He helped Natalie dismount and then tended to both horses, removing their saddles and rubbing them down with handfuls of dried grass before letting them drink from the small pool the water had formed. Natalie sat on a rock near the fire and watched him work. He moved with the competence of someone who had been taking care of himself in the wilderness for a long time, and there was something reassuring about the methodical way he went about his tasks. When the horses were settled, he poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Thank you," Natalie said, wrapping her hands around the cup. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was hot, and it helped drive away the chill that had settled into her bones despite the warmth of the afternoon. Preston poured a cup for himself and settled onto the ground across the fire from her. "You mind telling me what you were doing riding alone through Picket Wire Canyon?" he asked. "This isn't exactly safe country for a woman traveling solo." "I know," Natalie admitted. "I was on the stagecoach from Denver, but we broke an axle about 15 miles back. The driver said it would take 3 days to fix, but my father is dying in Las Animas. He's been sick for months, and the telegram I received said I needed to come immediately. I couldn't wait, so I hired a horse and decided to ride ahead." Preston's expression grew grave. "I'm sorry about your father, madam, but you nearly got yourself killed trying to reach him." "I know," Natalie said quietly. "It was foolish, but he's all the family I have left in the world. My mother died when I was 16, and my father raised me on his own. He's the reason I was able to go to school and become a teacher. I had to try to reach him." "That's not foolish," Preston said, his tone gentler. "That's loyal. There's a difference." He took a sip of his coffee and studied her over the rim of his cup. "Las Animas is about 20 miles from here if you follow the Purgat-War River. It's rough country, but it's safer than trying to go back through the canyon. I was heading that direction anyway, so I'll ride with you if you want company." "You do that?" Natalie asked, surprised. "But you don't even know me." "I know you're a woman traveling alone through dangerous country, and I know you're trying to get to your dying father," Preston said. "That's enough for me. Besides, those bandits might decide to come back once they work up their courage again. I'd feel better knowing you got where you're going safe." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No repayment needed," Preston said. He stood and started unpacking his saddlebags. "We should probably get some rest. Sun will be down in a few hours and we can start fresh in the morning." Las Animas is a long ride, but if we push hard we can make it by tomorrow evening. "Tomorrow evening," Natalie repeated. She prayed that would be soon enough, that her father would hold on just a little longer. "What were you doing out here, Mr. Matthews? Are you a rancher?" "Preston," he corrected with a slight smile. "And no, not a rancher. I work as a drover mostly, moving cattle from Texas up to the railheads in Kansas. Just finished a drive to Dodge City and I'm heading home to my sister's place near Las Animas. She married a farmer there about 3 years back, and I try to visit when I can." "So you're from Las Animas originally?" Natalie asked. "Near enough," Preston said. "Grew up on a ranch about 30 miles west of there. My parents died of fever when I was 18 and my sister was only 16. We sold the ranch and she moved to Las Animas where she met her husband. I wasn't ready to settle down, so I took to the trail. Been working cattle drives ever since." "That must be a hard life," Natalie said. Preston shrugged. "It's the only life I know, but I'm getting tired of it, truth be told. I'm 26 years old, and I've spent the last 8 years sleeping on the ground and eating dust. My sister keeps telling me I should find a nice girl and settle down, but it's hard to meet nice girls when you're on the trail 10 months out of the year." There was something wistful in his voice that made Natalie's heart ache. She found herself studying him more closely, noting the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the calluses on his hands, the easy strength in the way he moved. He was handsome in a weathered sort of way, she realized, and there was a fundamental decency to him that she had recognized even in the midst of her terror. "Your sister sounds like a wise woman," Natalie said carefully. Preston smiled, a real smile this time that lit up his whole face. "She is. Stubborn as a mule, too. She won't let me leave her place until I've eaten enough to feed an army, and she always has some chore or another that she needs help with. But I don't mind. It's nice to have family, even if she does boss me around." They talked as the sun sank lower in the sky, sharing stories about their lives. Natalie told him about her work as a teacher in Denver, about the children she taught, and the satisfaction she found in helping them learn. Preston told her about the cattle drives, about the beauty of the plains at dawn and the terror of stampedes, about the friends he had made and lost along the trail. He was easy to talk to, Natalie discovered, with a dry sense of humor and a thoughtful way of listening that made her feel heard. When darkness fell, Preston laid out his bedroll for her and insisted she take it, despite her protests. "I've slept on the bare ground more times than I can count," he said firmly. "You take the bedroll. I'll be fine." Natalie was too exhausted to argue further. She lay down near the fire, wrapped in Preston's blanket, and watched the stars wheel overhead. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Preston sitting with his back against a rock, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch through the night. She woke at dawn to find him already moving around the camp, making coffee and checking the horses. Her body ached from the previous day's ride, and her face felt tight where tears had dried on her skin. Preston handed her a cup of coffee and some hardtack, apologizing for the meager breakfast. "We'll get a proper meal in Las Animas," he promised, "but this will keep us going until then." They set out within the hour, following the Purgatoire River north toward Las Animas. The landscape was stark and beautiful, red rock mesas rising against a brilliant blue sky, the river cutting a green ribbon through the arid land. Preston set a steady pace, fast enough to make good time but not so fast that it would exhaust the horses. He seemed to know every inch of this country, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the people who lived here, both the settlers and the Ute tribes who had claimed this land long before the white men came. As they rode, Natalie found herself watching Preston more than the landscape. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance. He rode like he had been born in the saddle, moving with his horse in perfect harmony, and his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for danger. She felt safer with him than she had felt in years, and it was more than just his skill with a gun. It was the fundamental kindness she sensed in him, the decency that had made him risk his life for a stranger. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Preston found a spot in the shade of a cottonwood tree, near the river where the horses could drink. Natalie sat on a rock and watched the water flow past, thinking about her father and wondering if he was still alive. The fear was a constant weight in her chest, making it hard to breathe. "You're worried about your father," Preston said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Natalie admitted. "I keep thinking about what I'll say to him when I see him, or if I'll even get the chance to say anything at all." Preston was quiet for a moment, then said, "When my parents died, I was away from the ranch. I'd gone into town for supplies, and when I got back, they were both already gone. The fever had taken them in less than a day. I never got to say goodbye, and that ate at me for a long time. But eventually I realized that they knew how I felt about them. I'd shown them every day of my life in the way I worked hard and tried to make them proud. Sometimes words aren't as important as we think they are. But they help," Natalie said softly. "Yes," Preston agreed. "They do. And I hope you get the chance to say everything you need to say. But if you don't, remember that your father knows you love him. You wouldn't be risking your life to get to him if you didn't." They rode on through the afternoon, and the land began to change gradually. The mesas gave way to rolling hills covered in sparse grass, and they saw signs of settlement. A distant ranch house, a fence line, cattle grazing in the distance. Preston grew quieter as they rode, his attention focused on the horizon. Once, he held up his hand to stop, and they sat motionless for several minutes while he studied something in the distance. Finally, he relaxed and waved her forward. "Just being cautious," he explained. "Those bandits from yesterday might have friends in these parts." But they saw no one else on the trail, and as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, the town of Las Animas appeared before them. It was a modest settlement, perhaps 50 buildings clustered around a main street, with the river flowing past on the eastern edge. Natalie could see the church steeple rising above the other buildings and smoke from cook fires drifting into the evening air. "We made it," she said, relief flooding through her. "That we did," Preston replied. "Where does your father live?" "He has a room at the boarding house on Main Street," Natalie said. "At least, that's what the telegram said. I've never actually been to Las Animas before." They rode down the main street as the lamplighters were beginning their rounds. People turned to stare at them as they passed, and Natalie realized what they must look like. Her with her torn and dusty dress, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders, and Preston with his bullet-holed hat and trail-worn clothes. They looked like exactly what they were, two people who had been through something difficult together. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a wide porch, painted white with green trim. Preston helped Natalie dismount and tied both horses to the hitching rail. "I'll come in with you," he said, "just to make sure everything is all right." Natalie nodded gratefully. Now that she was here, she found herself terrified of what she might find inside. Preston seemed to understand because he offered her his arm. She took it, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. The landlady who answered the door was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. Her expression softened when she saw Natalie. "You must be Miss Norton," she said. "Your father has been asking for you." Come in, come in. He's upstairs in room 4. "How is he?" Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The landlady hesitated. "The doctor says it won't be long now, but he's been holding on, waiting for you. I think he'll be glad you made it in time." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she managed to say. Preston squeezed her arm gently. "Go on," he said. "I'll be right here if you need me." Natalie climbed the stairs on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Room 4 was at the end of the hall, and the door was ajar. She pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. Her father lay in the narrow bed, so thin and wasted that she almost didn't recognize him. He had always been a big man, barrel-chested and strong, but illness had carved him down to bones and papery skin. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was labored and rattling. For a terrible moment, Natalie thought she was too late, but then his eyes opened and focused on her face. "Natalie," he whispered, and his whole face transformed with joy. "You came." "Of course I came, Papa," Natalie said, rushing to his side. She took his hand in both of hers, shocked by how cold and frail it felt. "I came as fast as I could. My girl," her father said. "My beautiful girl." "I'm so proud of you. Did I ever tell you that?" "Yes, Papa," Natalie said through her tears. "Many times." "Good," he said. "It's important that you know. Everything I did to make sure you'd have a good life, and you did it. You made something of yourself. You're a teacher. That's more than I ever dreamed for you." "You gave me everything," Natalie said. "Every opportunity. I wouldn't be who I am without you." They talked as the light faded from the windows, Natalie holding her father's hand and telling him about her life in Denver, about the school and her students and her little apartment. He listened with his eyes half closed, smiling at the stories. Sometimes he would drift off for a few minutes, and Natalie would sit in terrified silence, thinking each breath might be his last. But then his eyes would open again and he would squeeze her hand. "I'm not afraid," he told her as full darkness fell. I'm ready. Your mother has been waiting for me for a long time, but I couldn't go without seeing you one more time without making sure you knew how much I love you. I love you too, Papa, Natalie whispered. So much. Be happy, Natalie, her father said. That's all I want for you. Find someone good, someone who will treasure you the way you deserve. Build a life full of love and children and laughter. Promise me. I promise, Natalie said. Her father smiled and closed his eyes. His breathing grew more labored, and Natalie sat beside him, holding his hand and crying silent tears. The landlady came in at some point and lit a lamp, then left again without saying anything. Natalie lost track of time, focused entirely on her father's face, memorizing every line and feature. Just before midnight, her father took one last rattling breath and was still. Natalie sat frozen for a long moment, unable to process what had just happened. Then the reality of it crashed over her, and she bent over his body, sobbing. She didn't know how long she cried, but eventually she became aware of a presence in the room. She looked up to find Preston standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands. He didn't say anything, just stood there with an expression of deep sympathy on his face. He's gone, Natalie said unnecessarily. I know, Preston said gently. I'm so sorry. The landlady appeared behind Preston, and together they helped Natalie to her feet and led her to another room down the hall. The woman helped her wash her face and brought her tea, speaking in a soft, soothing voice about the arrangements that would need to be made. Preston stood by the window, giving Natalie privacy, but remaining close enough that she could see him if she looked up. Eventually the landlady left, promising to send for the undertaker in the morning. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed in the small room, feeling hollowed out and exhausted beyond measure. Preston moved to the chair by the door and sat down. You should rest, he said. You've been through a lot these past 2 days. I can't sleep, Natalie said. Every time I close my eyes I see him. I know, Preston said, but you need to try. Your body needs rest even if your mind won't settle. Natalie lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Preston turned down the lamp until it was just a soft glow, then settled back in his chair. I'll be right here, he said. You're not alone. Those words, simple as they were, broke something open inside Natalie. She turned her face into the pillow and cried again, but this time the tears felt cleansing rather than devastating. Eventually, exhaustion won out over grief, and she fell into a fitful sleep. She woke several times during the night, and each time she could see Preston silhouetted against the window, keeping watch. He never moved from that chair, and knowing he was there made it possible for her to close her eyes again. When morning came, pale light filtering through the curtains, Natalie sat up to find Preston gone. For a moment she felt a stab of panic, but then the door opened and he came in carrying a tray with coffee and toast. The landlady made breakfast, he said. You should eat something. Natalie hadn't thought she was hungry, but when she smelled the coffee and warm bread, her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. She ate while Preston stood by the window, looking out at the street below. I talked to the undertaker, he said. He'll come by this afternoon to discuss arrangements, and I sent a telegram to the school in Denver, letting them know you'll need a few more days. You didn't have to do all that, Natalie said. I wanted to help, Preston said simply. You shouldn't have to deal with all this alone. Over the next 3 days, Preston proved himself indispensable. He handled all the practical details of her father's death with quiet efficiency, speaking to the undertaker and the minister, arranging for the burial in the small cemetery at the edge of town. He was there beside Natalie at the funeral, a small affair attended by a handful of people who had known her father in Las Animas. He stood with her at the graveside as they lowered the coffin into the ground, and when she broke down crying, he put his arm around her shoulders and held her up. Afterward, back at the boarding house, Natalie sat in her room and tried to think about the future. She would need to return to Denver soon, back to her students and her life there. But the thought of leaving felt wrong somehow, though she couldn't quite articulate why. There was a knock on her door, and she opened it to find Preston standing there, his hat in his hands. He looked uncomfortable, almost nervous, which was so unlike his usual confident demeanor that Natalie felt a flutter of concern. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," Preston said quickly. "I just wanted to check on you, see if you needed anything." "I'm all right," Natalie said. "Or I will be eventually. Thank you for everything you've done, Preston. I truly don't know what I would have done without you." "You're stronger than you think," Preston said. "You would have managed." "Maybe," Natalie said. "But I'm grateful I didn't have to manage alone." She hesitated, then added, "When are you leaving for your sister's place?" "I already sent her a message," Preston said. "Told her I'd be delayed a few days. I wanted to make sure you were all right before I left." "You've already done so much," Natalie said. "You don't need to stay on my account." "I know I don't need to," Preston said, "but I want to." He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made Natalie's heart skip. "Truth is, I'm not ready to say goodbye yet. These past few days, getting to know you, it's made me realize something. My sister was right. I have been lonely. But I never knew what I was missing until I met you." Natalie felt her breath catch in her throat. "Preston," she said softly. "I know this isn't the right time," Preston continued, the words coming out in a rush now. "You just lost your father and you're grieving, and you probably think I'm crazy for saying this. But life is short, Natalie. My parents taught me that. Your father taught you that. And I don't want to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston took a step closer to her. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you, someone brave and kind and loyal. Someone who makes me want to stop drifting and put down roots. I know we've only known each other a few days, but it feels like longer. It feels like I've known you forever." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. "I feel it too," she admitted. "From the moment you blocked the Bandits' path, from the moment you looked up at me and I saw your face, something shifted inside me. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude or the intensity of the situation, but it's more than that. It's you." Preston reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her cheek, and Natalie leaned into his touch. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I know you need time to grieve your father, but when you're ready, I'd like to court you proper. I'd like to see where this thing between us might lead." "I'd like that too," Natalie whispered. Preston smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed his whole face, and then he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll be here when you need me." Over the following weeks, Preston proved true to his word. He moved to a room at the boarding house and found work at a nearby ranch, helping with the late-season cattle work. Every evening he would knock on Natalie's door and they would walk together through the town, talking about everything and nothing. He told her more about his childhood, about learning to ride and rope from his father, about the dreams he had once had of owning his own ranch. She told him about growing up as an only child, about the books she loved and her passion for teaching, about the quiet satisfaction of watching a child's face light up when they finally understood something difficult. Gradually, Natalie's grief transformed from a sharp, cutting pain into something softer and more bearable. She would always miss her father, but she began to be able to think about him with more joy than sorrow, remembering the good times and the lessons he had taught her. And through it all, Preston was there, a steady presence that she came to depend on. One evening in late October, as they walked along the bank of the Purgatoire River under a sky painted orange and pink by the setting sun, Preston took Natalie's hand in his. It was the first time they had held hands, and the simple contact sent warmth flooding through her body. "I've been thinking," Preston said, "about what I want from my life, about what would make me happy." "And what would make you happy?" Natalie asked. "You," Preston said simply. "A life with you. I know it's fast, and I know people will say we're crazy for making decisions after only knowing each other a few weeks, but I don't care what people say. I know what I feel, and I know it's real." Natalie stopped walking and turned to face him. In the golden light of sunset, he looked impossibly handsome, his gray eyes warm and full of emotion. "I know what I feel too," she said. "And you're right, it is real. But there are practical considerations, Preston. My life is in Denver. My job, my students, my apartment. And your life is here or on the trail. How would we make it work?" "You could stay here," Preston suggested. "Las Animas needs a teacher. I asked around, and the schoolhouse here has been without a proper teacher for nearly a year. The town council would hire you in a heartbeat if you were interested. And I've been talking to some ranchers about starting my own spread. I've saved up money from years of cattle drives, enough to buy some land and a few head of cattle to start with. It wouldn't be much at first, but we could build something together. A real life, a real home." Natalie felt her heart racing. Everything he was suggesting sounded wonderful, but it also terrified her. She had worked so hard to build her independence in Denver, to create a life that was entirely her own. Could she give that up for a man she had known for less than a month? But as she looked into Preston's eyes, she realized that she wouldn't be giving anything up. She would be choosing something better, something she hadn't even known she wanted until she met him. A partner, a home, a future filled with love and possibility. "Yes," she said, Preston's face lit up with joy. "Yes, you mean it. Yes," Natalie repeated, laughing now. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes to all of it." Preston swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her, a gentle kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Natalie kissed him back, her hands tangled in his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They were married 6 weeks later, on a cold December morning in the small church in Las Animas. Preston's sister, Sarah, and her husband John stood up with them, along with the landlady from the boarding house who had become a friend to Natalie. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Natalie wore a dress of deep blue velvet that Sarah had helped her make, and Preston wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome and just a little uncomfortable. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at Sarah and John's farmhouse. Sarah had cooked an enormous meal, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Preston's sister pulled Natalie aside at one point and hugged her tightly. "I'm so glad he found you," Sarah said. "Preston has been lost for so long, drifting from place to place without any real purpose. But I can see he's found his purpose now. You've given him something to work for, something to build toward. Thank you for that." "He saved my life," Natalie said. "In more ways than one. I should be thanking you for raising such a good man." "We'll call it even then," Sarah said with a smile. Preston and Natalie spent their wedding night at the boarding house, in the same room where Natalie had stayed since arriving in Las Animas. It felt strange and wonderful to be married, to have this man who had been a stranger just 2 months ago now be her husband. Preston was gentle and patient, and Natalie discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like what the whispered stories among women had led her to expect. It was beautiful and profound and deeply connecting. The next morning, they began their life together in earnest. Preston had found a piece of land about 5 miles outside of town, along a creek that fed into the Purgat-War River. It was 200 acres of decent grazing land with a small cabin that needed work, but was structurally sound. They moved in with nothing but their few possessions, and a dream of what they could build together. Those first months were hard. Winter on the Colorado plains was brutal, with bitter winds and occasional blizzards that left them snowed in for days at a time. Preston worked from dawn to dusk, repairing the cabin, building a proper barn, and preparing for the cattle he planned to buy in the spring. Natalie took the teaching position at the Los Animas schoolhouse, riding into town each morning and back each evening, teaching reading and arithmetic to 20 children ranging from age 6 to 14. But despite the hardships, Natalie had never been happier. She loved coming home each evening to find Preston waiting for her, loved the way his face lit up when he saw her riding up the path. She loved the small domestic rituals they developed, making coffee together in the morning, sitting by the fire in the evening while Preston read aloud from the newspaper, and Natalie worked on mending or knitting. She loved the way he kissed her goodnight, the way he held her close when the winter wind howled around their little cabin. In March, Preston used his savings to buy 50 head of cattle from a rancher who was giving up and moving back east. It wasn't many, but it was a start. He hired 2 cowboys to help him manage the herd, young men who were grateful for steady work. Natalie watched her husband transform as he worked his own land, saw the pride and satisfaction in his face as he built something that was truly his. That spring, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, wonder, and then pure joy. "We're going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice full of awe. "Yes," Natalie confirmed. "In late October, if I'm calculating correctly." Preston pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Preston said. He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your papa. I just want you to know that you're already loved more than you can imagine, and your mama and I are going to do everything we can to give you a good life." Natalie ran her fingers through Preston's hair, her heart so full of love she thought she might overflow with it. This was what her father had wanted for her, she realized. This happiness, this love, this sense of building something meaningful. And she had found it with a cowboy who had blocked the path of bandits and changed the course of her life forever. The summer passed in a blur of heat and hard work. Preston's cattle herd grew as calves were born, and he began making plans to expand. Natalie taught through June, and then took the summer off to prepare for the baby. She spent her days sewing tiny clothes, organizing the small room they had added to the cabin as a nursery, and helping Sarah put up preserves for the winter. As her belly grew round with their child, Preston became even more attentive and protective. He insisted she rest more, worried constantly about her health, and spent hours talking to the baby through her stomach. At night, he would lay his hand on her belly and marvel at the movements he felt. "That's our child in there," he would say, wonder in his voice every time. "Our baby." Their son was born on a cool October evening, with Sarah serving as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie thought she couldn't endure any more. But Preston stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and finally, their baby entered the world with a lusty cry that announced he was healthy and strong. "A boy," Sarah said, placing the squalling infant on Natalie's chest. A beautiful boy. Natalie looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair, and fell instantly and completely in love. Preston leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face as he touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He's perfect," Preston whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Peter Thomas Matthews, Peter after Preston's father and Thomas after Natalie's. Little Peter was a good baby, content and sweet-tempered, and watching Preston with him melted Natalie's heart every single time. Her strong, tough cowboy husband turned to absolute mush around his son, carrying him everywhere, singing him silly songs, and narrating everything he did as if Peter could understand. "Now we're going to check on the cattle," Preston would say, tucking Peter into a sling against his chest. "See those cows over there? Those are Herefords, good beef cattle. When you're bigger, you'll help me take care of them." The ranch continued to grow and prosper over the next few years. Preston proved to have a real talent for ranching, for breeding good stock and managing his land well. He hired more cowboys and built a larger barn. They added rooms onto the cabin until it was a proper ranch house, with a parlor and a dining room and bedrooms for the family they both hoped would grow. And grow it did. When Peter was 2, Natalie gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Rose, who were as different as night and day despite being born minutes apart. Anna was quiet and thoughtful, while Rose was loud and adventurous. Preston doted on them equally, calling them his prairie flowers and carrying one on each hip when they were small. 2 years after the twins came another boy, James, who had Preston's gray eyes and Natalie's dark hair. And 2 years after that, a girl they named Grace, who was the baby of the family and knew how to wrap everyone around her little finger from the moment she was born. 5 children in 8 years made for a chaotic household, but it was a happy chaos. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter, of children running and playing, of family meals around the big table Preston had built. Natalie had stopped teaching when Peter was born, but she taught her own children at home, gathering them around the table each morning for lessons in reading and arithmetic and history. Preston proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. No matter how busy he was with the ranch, he always made time for his children. He taught Peter and James to ride and rope, though Peter was barely 6 and James only 4. He braided the twins' hair, albeit somewhat clumsily, and let Grace ride on his shoulders everywhere he went. He read to them every night, gathering all 5 children in the parlor, and reading from books Natalie ordered from Denver. On their 10-year wedding anniversary, Preston took Natalie on a picnic to the spot along the creek where he had first told her he loved her. Sarah and John had agreed to watch the children for the afternoon, giving them a rare moment of time alone together. They sat on a blanket under the cottonwood trees, eating the lunch Natalie had packed and watching the creek flow past. Preston looked older now, lines deepening around his eyes and threads of silver appearing in his wheat-colored hair, but to Natalie, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him blocking the canyon path. 10 years, Preston said, shaking his head in wonder. Feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Natalie said. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the warmth of his presence. Sometimes I think about that day in the canyon, about how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. And then you were just there, like you'd been sent by Providence. I often think about that day too, Preston said. About how close I came to taking a different route. I almost didn't go through Picket Wire Canyon that day. I was considering going around the long way because I knew there had been bandit activity in the area. But something made me go through anyway. Maybe it was Providence, like you said. Maybe I was meant to be there to meet you. I'm grateful you were, Natalie said. Not just because you saved my life, though of course I'm grateful for that, but because you became my life. You and our children and this ranch we've built together. This is everything I never knew I wanted." Preston turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You gave me purpose, Natalie. Before I met you, I was just drifting, going from one cattle drive to the next, sleeping on the ground and never staying in one place long enough to call it home. But you changed everything. You made me want to build something permanent, something lasting. You made me want to be the kind of man worthy of your love." "You've always been worthy," Natalie said, her eyes filling with tears. "From the very first moment." Preston kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Natalie thought about how far they had come from that terrified woman and the cowboy who had saved her. They had built a life together, brick by brick and day by day, through hard work and dedication and an abiding love for each other. "I love you," Preston said. "More than I did 10 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible. But love grows, doesn't it? It deepens and changes and becomes something even more precious than what you started with." "It does," Natalie agreed. "And I love you too, always and forever." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, talking and remembering and dreaming about the future. They talked about their children, about Peter who wanted to be a rancher like his father, about Anna who loved books and learning, about Rose who wanted to race horses, about James who collected rocks and insects with equal enthusiasm, and about little Grace who declared she was going to be a school teacher when she grew up, just like Mama used to be. "We've done well," Preston said as they packed up to head home. "Don't you think?" "We've done very well," Natalie confirmed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." As they rode back to the ranch house, side by side on their horses, just as they had ridden together that first journey to Las Animas, Natalie thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How one moment of terror in a canyon could lead to all of this: love and family and a home that sheltered them all. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Peter grew tall and strong, taking on more and more responsibility for the ranch. The twins became beautiful young women, Anna quiet and bookish, Rose bold and vivacious. James developed a passion for breeding horses, building on the foundation his father had established. And Grace, true to her word, trained to become a teacher, working alongside the schoolmaster in Las Animas before she was even out of her teens. Preston and Natalie grew older together, their dark hair silvering, lines deepening on their faces, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it continued to grow stronger with each passing year. They still took walks together in the evening when the weather was fine, still sat by the fire on winter nights talking about their day. They still kissed each other goodbye in the morning and hello in the evening, still held hands when they thought no one was watching. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the county, known for quality cattle and well-bred horses. Preston was respected as a fair employer and a skilled rancher, and Natalie was beloved in the community for her kindness and wisdom. Their children grew up secure in the knowledge that they were loved, and that became the foundation for them to build their own good lives. When Peter was 23, he married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring spread, a sweet girl named Caroline who fit into their family as if she had always been there. They built a house on the far end of the property and began building their own herd, with Peter working alongside his father to manage the growing Matthews ranch. Anna married a doctor who had come to Las Animas from Boston, a thoughtful young man who appreciated her love of learning and discussion. Rose, predictably, fell in love with and married a rodeo rider, and they traveled the circuit together, Rose competing in barrel racing and thrilling her family with her adventures. James took over the horse breeding operation, developing a line of cow ponies that became sought after throughout Colorado. And Grace did indeed become a teacher, taking over the schoolhouse in Las Animas and inspiring a new generation of children just as her mother once had. Through all of these changes and milestones, Preston and Natalie remained the steady center of their growing family. They became grandparents, delighting in Peter and Caroline's children. First a daughter they named Natalie after her grandmother, then a son, then twin boys. They watched their other children marry and start families of their own, their ranch house becoming the gathering place for an ever-expanding clan. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 40 people crammed into the house and spilling out onto the porch, children and grandchildren, in-laws and friends. Sarah and John were there, both gray-haired now but still spry. The house rang with laughter and conversation and the sound of children playing. That evening, after everyone had eaten and the younger grandchildren had been put to bed in various rooms throughout the house, Preston and Natalie slipped away to sit on the porch swing. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the prairie in shades of fire. 30 years, Natalie said, shaking her head in wonder. How did that happen? One day at a time, Preston said, putting his arm around her shoulders. And every single one of them a gift. Do you ever regret it? Natalie asked. Giving up the trail for a life tied to one place. Not for a single second, Preston said firmly. The trail was just movement, Natalie. This is living. This family, this ranch, you, all of it. This is what life is supposed to be. From inside the house came the sound of Grace playing the piano, one of the old songs Natalie used to sing to the children when they were small. Voices joined in, harmonizing. Preston and Natalie sat and listened, rocking gently on the porch swing. I'm glad those bandits chased me through that canyon, Natalie said suddenly. Preston laughed. That's a strange thing to be glad about. But it's true, Natalie insisted. If they hadn't chased me, I wouldn't have ridden into you. We might never have met. And all of this, everything we've built, all those people in there, none of it would exist. You're right, Preston said thoughtfully. Strange how one terrifying moment can change everything. How the worst day of your life can lead to the best things in your life. Not so strange, Natalie said. That's just how life works, I think. The hard moments make the good ones possible. The dark makes the light seem brighter. Preston kissed the top of her head. When did you get so philosophical? I've had 30 years to think about it, Natalie said with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The music from inside continued, and they could hear their children's voices and their grandchildren's laughter. It was a sound of home and family and love, and it filled Natalie with a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. What are you thinking? Preston asked, noticing her tears. I'm thinking about my father, Natalie said. About the promise I made him to be happy. To build a life full of love and children and laughter. I kept that promise, Preston. We kept it together. Yes, we did, Preston agreed. And I like to think he's watching somewhere, proud of the life you've built. I like to think that too, Natalie said. She wiped her eyes and smiled. And I think he'd be glad I found you. A good man who treasures me just like he wanted. I do treasure you, Preston said seriously. Every single day. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Natalie Matthews. And you're the best thing that ever happened to me, Natalie replied. My cowboy who blocked the path and saved me in every way a person can be saved. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars came out in their full glory, Preston and Natalie sat together on their porch swing, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in the love they had built. The prairie stretched out before them, wild and beautiful, just as it had been 30 years ago when a terrified woman had ridden through a canyon and into the arms of her destiny. Their story had begun with violence and fear, with bandits and bullets and a desperate chase through narrow rock walls. But it had become something beautiful, something lasting. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, tenderness and devotion could take root and flourish. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost friends to age and illness, celebrated new births and marriages, weathered droughts and hard winters. Through it all, Preston and Natalie faced everything together, their bond only growing stronger with each challenge overcome. When Preston was 60, he began to slow down, handing over more and more of the ranch operations to Peter while he took on an advisory role. He spent more time in the house, helping Natalie with whatever projects she had going, reading in the parlor, playing with his grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. He never complained about getting older, but Natalie could see it frustrated him sometimes, the way his body couldn't do what his mind remembered doing. "I used to be able to ride all day without getting tired," he said one afternoon, rubbing his aching knees. "And now you're a grandfather who gets to spoil children and tell stories," Natalie said practically. "That's not such a bad trade." "No," Preston agreed, smiling as his youngest grandchild climbed into his lap. "I suppose it isn't." Natalie herself felt the passage of time in her own body, in the way her hands ached in the mornings and her eyes needed spectacles for reading. But she didn't mind growing old, not when she was doing it beside Preston. They had been granted what so many people longed for, a long life together, full of love and meaning. On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Las Animas County. People came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become something of a legend in the area. The cowboy and the schoolteacher, who had built an empire of love and family on the Colorado prairie. Speeches were made, toasts were drunk, and Preston and Natalie danced together in their barn, which had been cleared and decorated for the occasion. As they moved slowly to the music, Natalie rested her head on Preston's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "40 years," she whispered, "and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day." "Same here," Preston said. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, Natalie, and you still make my heart race like I'm a young man courting you for the first time." "Flatterer," Natalie said, but she was smiling. "It's not flattery if it's true," Preston insisted. As they danced, Natalie looked around the barn at all the faces watching them. Their children, now middle-aged with children of their own, their grandchildren ranging from babies to young adults, friends and neighbors who had become family over the years. This was their legacy, she realized. Not just the prosperous ranch or the successful children, but this feeling of love and community that radiated out from the core of their marriage and touched everyone around them. When the dance ended, everyone applauded and Preston kissed Natalie in front of all of them, a kiss that made the younger grandchildren giggle and the older ones roll their eyes affectionately. But Natalie didn't care. Let them see how much she loved this man. Let them see that love didn't fade with age. It only deepened and became more precious. The celebration went late into the night, but eventually people began to drift away, to their homes and their own lives. Preston and Natalie's children helped clean up. Then they too departed. Leaving the ranch house quiet once more, Preston and Natalie climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving slowly but together. They got ready for bed in the comfortable silence of long marriage, each knowing the other's rhythms and habits as well as their own. When they finally lay down together, Preston gathered Natalie close, just as he had done every night for 40 years. "Thank you," he said softly into the darkness. "For what?" Natalie asked. "For saying yes," Preston said. "For staying in Las Animas, for building this life with me, for giving me everything I never knew I needed." "Thank you for blocking that canyon path," Natalie replied, "for being brave enough to stand up to those bandits, for seeing something in me worth protecting, worth loving." "Always," Preston said. "I'll love you always, Natalie, in this life and whatever comes after." "Always," Natalie echoed, and they fell asleep in each other's arms, secure in their love and grateful for every moment they had been given. They had many more years together, years filled with the ordinary moments that make up a life. Morning coffee on the porch, evening walks along the creek, family dinners on Sundays, quiet nights by the fire. They watched their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, making them great-grandparents multiple times over. They saw the turn of the century, marveling at how much the world had changed since that day in 1878 when a terrified woman had ridden through a canyon. Preston lived to be 78 years old, and when he finally passed away on a quiet spring morning with Natalie holding his hand, he went peacefully, a man content with the life he had lived. His funeral was one of the largest Las Animas had ever seen, with people coming from across Colorado to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Natalie grieved deeply, but she didn't break. She had their children around her, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she had 52 years of memories to sustain her. She lived for another 8 years, still sharp and engaged with the world, telling stories about Preston to anyone who would listen. She made sure every grandchild and great-grandchild knew the story of how their grandfather had blocked a canyon path to save their grandmother, how one act of courage had led to this entire sprawling family. When Natalie passed away at the age of 86, she was buried beside Preston in the cemetery overlooking Las Animas, under a cottonwood tree not unlike the ones that grew along their creek. Their children stood together at the graveside, holding their own children and grandchildren, united in grief, but also in gratitude for the example their parents had set. Peter, the oldest, spoke at his mother's funeral, his voice steady despite his tears. "My parents taught us many things," he said. "They taught us the value of hard work, the importance of family, the power of love. But most of all, they taught us that courage isn't just about facing down bandits or surviving hardship. True courage is choosing to love someone completely, building a life with them day by day, and never giving up on each other no matter what challenges come your way." They lived that courage every single day of their 52 years together, and we're all here because of it. The Matthews Ranch continued to prosper for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while never forgetting the foundation that Preston and Natalie had laid. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. The cowboy who blocked the bandits' path, the schoolteacher he saved and married, and the dynasty of love they built on the Colorado prairie. And if you were to visit that ranch today, you would see a beautiful spread stretching across the rolling hills, with the Purgatoire River cutting through it. You would see cattle grazing and horses running in the pastures. You would see a big ranch house filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. And if you knew where to look, along the creek under the cottonwood trees, you would find a marker commemorating the spot where Preston Matthews first told Natalie Norton that he loved her, the place where two lives became one and a love story for the ages truly began. It was a story that started with terror and ended with triumph, that began with a chase through a canyon and concluded with a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, with all its danger and drama, but more than that, it was a story of love. Simple, profound, and eternal. The kind of love that doesn't just happen in one grand moment, but is built through thousands of small choices, day after day, year after year, until it becomes something unbreakable and beautiful. Preston and Natalie's story proved that even in the harshest environments, even when faced with violence and loss, love can take root and grow into something extraordinary. It proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best things, that providence works in mysterious ways, and that courage comes in many forms. Theirs was a love story that deserved to be remembered, to be told to children and grandchildren, to inspire others to take chances on love even when it seems risky or unconventional. Because in the end, what matters most isn't how long you knew someone before you married them, or whether your love story followed the expected pattern. What matters is the life you build together, the family you create, the love you nurture through all the seasons of your life. Preston and Natalie Matthews built something that lasted, something that mattered. They took one moment of courage in a canyon and transformed it into decades of love and joy. They proved that fairy tales can happen in the real world, that cowboys can be heroes, and that love, true love, is always worth fighting for. And so their story became part of the larger story of the American West, a reminder that alongside all the violence and hardship, there was also beauty and romance, and the eternal human capacity to love and be loved. Their story became a testament to the power of choosing love, of building something good in a hard world, of never giving up on each other or on the dreams you hold together. In a canyon in Colorado in 1878, a cowboy blocked a path and saved a woman's life. But that was just the beginning. What came after, the life they built together, the family they created, the love they nurtured through more than 50 years together, that was the real story. That was the miracle. That was what made their tale worth telling and retelling from generation to generation, as long as there are people who believe in the transformative power of love. And in the end, isn't that what all the best stories are about? Two people finding each other against all odds, choosing each other day after day, and building something beautiful together that outlasts their mortal years. Preston and Natalie Matthews did exactly that, and their love story, born in violence but nurtured in tenderness, became a beacon of hope and inspiration that shone across the decades, proving that love, when given the chance, can conquer anything and create everything. Their story ended not with a gunshot or a dramatic rescue, though it had started that way, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, love well given, and a family that would carry their legacy forward into the future. It ended with two people who had found in each other everything they needed, who had built a partnership that weathered every storm, and who had loved each other completely from that first moment in the canyon until their final breaths. That ultimately is the truest and most beautiful kind of love story, not one that ends with a wedding, but one that encompasses an entire lifetime of choosing love, building love, and living love every single day. Preston and Natalie Matthews had that kind of love, and it made all the difference.